It's so wonderful to welcome all of you here this evening for what's really a very special treat. We have Baktash Ahadi, who is, I lost count. This is either the third or the fourth time he's been in Rock Springs, but I can promise you it will not be the last time. And we thank you all for coming out tonight. We have a couple of big thank yous we want to make. First of all, to the Broadway Theater for allowing us in here and allowing us to use this beautiful facility. And most specifically, I want you to look to the back, and I want you to give a big shout out to Brad Russell, who's doing sound and lights. Please thank them for all their technical support. And thank all of you for being here. As many of you know, this is part of the programming of Abraham, which is the art exhibit that is currently on display at the Art Gallery at Western Wyoming Community College. If you haven't seen it yet, go up and see it. It's there through Saturday. Actually, I've heard it's going to be there through Sunday because we're not taking it down until Monday. It's part of a CARAVAN exhibit, which is a Middle Eastern peace-building co-op that was founded by the brand new Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Wyoming, Paul Gordon Chandler, who asked me to send his regrets that he cannot be with us tonight. He's out touring the state, which is more of a daunting task than one originally would think. It's a big state. But at any rate, the idea for this exhibit is Abraham, out of one, many. And the theme of that is Father Abraham. Father Abraham, to whom the three great monotheistic religions of the world, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, all trace their heritage. So we all come from the same person, meaning we're all the same. And that's the theme of this, is embracing each other as human beings and not as strangers or as the other. The art exhibit, we have some little flyers about it. It features 15 paintings by Middle Eastern artists, 5 by a Christian artist, 5 by a Jewish artist, and 5 by an Islamic artist. Please grab one of these and then go up to the college and see the exhibit. And if you think you'd like to hear Baktash again, or you know someone who wasn't able to come tonight, tomorrow we'll be doing a webinar. When I first talked with Baktash about coming out here, I said, we can do Zoom. I would rather die than do Zoom. I have spent a year on Zoom, and evidently Baktash feels the same way because he said, don't make me do Zoom, Bernie. Please don't make me do Zoom. So that's why we're doing live tonight, live from the Broadway, and recording it. But there will be a webinar tomorrow. There's information about that out in the lobby also. So we'd love to have you join us for the webinar as well and share that with anyone else who might like to be a part of this. So when we were talking about Abraham, out of one, many, and embracing the stranger, and who could we get to come in and do related programming? We all said kind of with one voice, Baktash. We have to have Baktash. Many of you have met him. As I mentioned, this is not his first time here in Rock Springs, nor will it be his last. I heard rumblings out in the lobby. There's some kind of planning going on about September, where, I don't know, the weather's better. I heard that. But he will be back, but right now, it's just my great pleasure to introduce to you someone who really, in Rock Springs, needs not much of an introduction because he personifies welcoming the stranger, embracing the other, and recognizing our common humanity throughout cultures, throughout the globe, and throughout all civilization. Please welcome Baktash Ahadi.
Okay.
Don't move.
I have to stay right here?
Right there, in your little box.
Okay. I think I'm going to do the opposite. I'm quite rebellious. Am I allowed to move?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
You can move. Just
Cool.
take the mic.
Cool.
with you.
Okay.
We're recording. Take
Okay.
the mic.
Okay. Good. How's everybody today? Good. Does this thing work, or is this strictly for the camera? I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. I'm not sure how to do this.
Go ahead and talk again.
Aha. Hi. Turn it up. How about this? Rock Springs is wonderful. Good. Okay, good. It's so wonderful to be here. This is my third time, Bernie, for being here. Yep. Last time I was here was in 2018. So I've missed you guys. I've missed this place. This is a wonderful little town where everybody knows everybody, which is really good if you're a good person, and really bad if you're not, right? Because word spreads really quickly. And I grew up in one of these towns, so I can speak from a place of my lived experience. What's really interesting about being here right now is I can't see any of you, like at all. This light's so strong. I wonder if I can, oh gosh. Can I ask for like a Mr. Light Person or Miss Light Person? Is it possible to just, I would love to see people, if that's okay. Is that okay? And I think as a matter of this programming, I think we're going to go for about an hour, and then in total, so what I would like to do is speak for a little bit, and then have a conversation, because I believe conversation is the most important tool that we have to come to an understanding. So I'd love to facilitate a conversation amongst all of us about the things that you're curious about. And so that's really my job, is to kind of ask really good questions of you, even if you ask me a good question. Okay? Okay. That's a little better. Yeah, okay, that helps. Okay, let's just go. So I'm going to tell you my origin story and how I got to where I am right now. And what I'd like to do is pull out some themes from my own story that I'd like to kind of share with you that we can work with together. Okay? So I was born in Afghanistan in 1981. If you remember what was happening in 1981 in the world at the time, the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. A lot of people don't realize why the Soviet Union actually invaded the country. Unlike Wyoming and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, there's no oil in Afghanistan. Okay? So the reason why the Soviet Union essentially went into Afghanistan was essentially to have access to a warm water port, that being the Indian Ocean at the time. And Afghanistan was the path to that place, to the place of warm water. I was born in 1981. The country was invaded by the Soviets in 1979. My father at the time was working for the Afghan government, and so what happened is his life was put into danger because the government was systematically filtering out people that weren't buying into their ideology of communism. And so what was really interesting is that my father's a very interesting person, and I love talking about him because not only is he the person that gave birth to me along with my mother, but he's taught me so many wonderful things. And it's always wonderful to speak to my father because he always boils down things in the most simplest way that allows for kind of wisdom to arise from that place. So my father fell in love with America before he actually came to America. My father was taught by a Peace Corps volunteer whose name was Eric in Kandahar in the 1960s. Okay? So if anybody has heard the name Kandahar, what comes to your mind? Probably the Taliban, maybe Al-Qaeda, right? The Taliban, the place in which the Taliban was formed and kind of came together is Kandahar, the place of my father's birth. And what's interesting is in the 1960s, the Peace Corps was in Afghanistan. And if you guys remember the 1960s, President Kennedy essentially allowed the Peace Corps to essentially go all over the world and not only kind of spread American ideals around the world, but also have these Peace Corps volunteers learn from the locals and bring that knowledge back to the United States so the United States and people in the United States can be more informed about the world. Wonderful concept. And I share this with you because I'm on the board of an organization called the Friends of Afghanistan, which is made up of former Peace Corps volunteers who are now in their 60s and 70s who served in Afghanistan in the 1960s. And they're still doing work related to Afghanistan and the region based on their experience there 40, 50 years ago. So it made such an impact on them that they're still doing work trying to bridge the gap between these two worlds. So nonetheless, my father had this teacher, whose name was Eric, that taught him English and the foundations of what it means to be an American, the ideals of Americanism, freedom of speech, individualism, right? This idea of accountability, this idea of rule of law. I know there are a few lawyers in the room. So my father fell in love with the idea of America before actually coming here, before actually seeing America on television, believe it or not. So what did that do? That led my father to move from Kandahar to Kabul, which is the capital city, and he got a job as a key punch operator. For people in this room, you may know what that is. A key punch operator, this was before Google and smartphones and typewriters even. So my father was a key punch operator for the first demographic study of Afghanistan for USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. Okay. So my father was working in this office collecting data information about people across the country. And he developed a relationship with the director. Soon after, my father had to essentially go into the service and became a soldier for the Afghan government, did it not once but twice. At that time, if you remember, the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan at that time on Valentine's Day was assassinated. And so overnight, all the Americans that were in Afghanistan came back to the United States. So my father got a job with the Afghan government. Soon after, Soviets invade. His life was put into danger. So he comes home. At the time, I was 3 years old. He comes home in 1984 and tells my mom, his wife, "Darling," I think he calls her darling, "Darling, we are leaving our country tonight. Make sure everything's ready. When I come back from work, we're leaving." And you have to understand my mother is 12 years younger than my father. And so she at this point had never left her neighborhood in her entire life. Okay? And so she thought to herself, oh, whatever. He's talking from his tail. Who knows what's going to happen? So Dad comes home. She had the bags packed, but she didn't really know what to expect. They get into a taxi, and they're off. We end up getting dropped off. Mind you, I don't remember any of this. In terms of childhood development, memory starts around the age of 3. So my memories don't kick in until my family gets to Pakistan. Okay? That doesn't mean memories and trauma don't live in our bodies as infants. I just don't remember them as a matter of my cognitive abilities. Okay? So we end up leaving, and once we end up getting outside of Kabul, my father at the time had ties with the Mujahideen, who you may know were fighting the war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. If you guys remember Charlie Wilson's war, they were the ones that were essentially collecting and or getting the arms from the United States via the CIA, via the Pakistani government that was then aiding them to fight America's war on behalf of Americans in Afghanistan. And at the time, the Mujahideen were fighting this war, and they called it their jihad. Some of you may know this. This word has come back into the lexicon in America in a post 9/11 world. But nonetheless, in the 1980s, this was very much the reality in Afghanistan. So my father had ties with the Mujahideen. And they put us on horseback. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. My brother's 1, I'm 3, my mom is 21, my father's 33. So, 7 days, 6 nights, we're trekking through the Hindu Kush mountain range. And for those that may not know, Hindu Kush in Farsi, the language of Afghanistan, one of the languages of Afghanistan, means, Hindu means people from India or Hindustan, Hindus. Kush means to kill. So these are the mountains that killed the Hindus or the Mughals that tried to invade Afghanistan or tried to essentially invade any army that was trying to cross them. So it gives you an idea of how treacherous they were. Imagine the Grand Tetons plus an extra 10,000 feet. Okay? Something like that. So we're trekking through these mountains. And you have to understand that the Soviets at the time knew that there was a huge caravan of people leaving the country en masse. So what would we do? We would travel at night and hide during the day in caves, under trees, and try to get some rest. 2 times, Soviet gunships found us, because they're doing patrols along the border, found us and came in the valleys where we were essentially trekking. Again, what's interesting about the notion of story is that I don't remember any of this. Yet I'm telling it to you as though it is my story. And I want you to take one piece of information away from this part of the conversation, is that it's interesting how other people's stories become our stories even though we didn't live them or even though we didn't remember them. Think about the stories that your parents tell about you when you were a kid. You're like, man, I have no idea. I don't remember that. Yet you tell it now to your children as though you did it, as though you remember it. It shapes who you are in some sense, doesn't it? So I want you to caveat that and think about all the different times in your life where that has happened, where you now do that in your own life. So, 2 times in which the Soviets came in with their gunships and essentially tried to kill us and everybody else that was along with us, to include the Mujahideen and some other families that were in our caravan. 2 times we almost died. And the one time, my father had this feeling that it was going to be the end for him and his family. Okay? People in this room, sometimes this may resonate with you. It's like something ominous is about to come, and you do something as though you're getting prepared for the leaving of this world. So what did my father do? First pass came around where the Soviet gunship came, just like a movie, struck these bullets into the valley. The sound of the jets, they say, are unbelievable. They made one sweep through, didn't hit anybody. The second time around, as they're kind of turning around, my father said, let's get together, let's everybody get together. And so everybody kind of huddled together, my mom, my brother, these Mujahideen, along with a couple other people that were there. And we huddled together. And the rationale for this was, if we were going to die, we're going to die together. So it's this idea of the need for human beings to, even in the face of death, to be one. This idea of being alone, this idea of isolation, I would argue is not healthy for us. Even in the wake of death, we want to not be alone. We want somebody's hand to be held. We want our hands to be held. We want to feel like we're held, not only when we come into the world, but when we leave this world. And so I'm writing my memoir right now, and I asked my father, how did you know to say that, and how did you know to do that? And he said, I don't know, son, it just felt right. And that'll never leave me. So it's the importance of intuition as it pertains to these emergency kind of crisis moments that kind of occur. Some people call it your intuition, some people call it God, some people call it your inner voice. Whatever you want to call it, the lesson that my father taught me in this instance was, listen to it. Luckily, nothing happened. During the second pass, when that Soviet gunship came through, for whatever reason, they didn't shoot their missiles, and they didn't shoot their bullets. After that pass, they left. They may have got called in, go on to another mission, go after somebody else, who knows? So, what's interesting is we end up making it to Peshawar, across the border into Pakistan, and eventually into Islamabad. And so my father's doing this, that, and the other to kind of, find food, survive. My mother's trying to take care of us. And so what my father did was really interesting, because my father at this point knew a little bit of English. Not much, but enough. Because remember, he was taught by a Peace Corps volunteer in Kandahar. And then he worked for USAID in Kabul. So he went to the consular's office in Islamabad. And he said, I would love a visa to America. I love my dad's, courage. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what the process was, but he figured, you know what? He took on the American, proposition, if you don't ask, you don't get, that sort of thing. I love that. My dad still, by the way, does that when he goes to Starbucks and Walmart. He'll say, I don't want to pay full price for this. Can I pay $2 less for this coffee? I don't want to pay $2. My dad's always bargaining. It's funny. It's like, Boba, this is a fixed price. He's like, I don't believe in fixed price. What are you talking about, Dad? This is America, man. Anyway, so my dad goes to the consular office and he says, I want to go to America. And they say, oh, sure, here's some forms, fill this out. And he started looking at these forms and realized that there was a place for a reference. And the reference that he put down was his director at USAID in Afghanistan in Kabul. His name was Dr. Craig Robinson. Dad puts in the form. 2 days later, they call him back. Mr. Ahadi, we've checked this out. Dr. Robinson actually knows you. Where would you like to go? He was like, what? And so then at that point, the process started where my parents didn't know anything about America except what was shown at that point on television, right? The idea that, every place in America looks like New York City. Money grows on trees. In cities, they're gangsters and they're all black, right? They're all super dangerous. These are the things that my parents understood. White people, they go to work, they work collars, they make a lot of money. It's amazing. That's all they really knew about the United States. Anyway, what ended up happening was, my dad asked, is there some sort of organization that we can align ourselves with? Is there something we can do? Because we don't know anything about America. We don't know anybody in America. We don't know anybody in America. And so the consular office said, there's an organization that essentially wants to sponsor a family that fits your profile. Husband, a wife, and 2 children. And my parents said, okay, what's the organization? St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. My parents said, they sound great. We don't know what that means, but they sound great. Sure, sounds awesome. Sounds better than the life that we have now, which was true. So at this point, my memory starts, and I start to remember things of my childhood at that time. Like if you think really deep and you think back into your life, you could probably pinpoint your first memory. Think about it. Think about your first memory. And think whether or not if it's a good memory, a positive memory, whether it was with your mother. My first memory was a violent memory about a guy getting chased by police and getting hit on top of a car and then getting swooped away. But anyway, it's an interesting experiment where you're trying to dig into your memory and start thinking about the things that you think you know about yourself. So we end up leaving Pakistan and coming to the United States, and I remember getting off the plane, talking about memory, getting off the plane and seeing what was probably 20 people. As we're getting off the plane, coming down the steps, they're clapping for us as though we're heroes. And I just remember, I'm super young. At this point, I was 5 years old. And I just remember feeling like, wow, this is an interesting place. None of these people look like us. My mom and my dad seem happy. I'm fighting with my brother because they end up giving us toys, and he gets the blue truck, and I want the blue truck, and we fight. And as we're kind of, being welcomed into Carlisle, Pennsylvania, we're flying to Harrisburg, actually. As we're being welcomed into Carlisle, what ends up happening is 9 families of this church, of St. Paul's Lutheran Church, are responsible for helping my family assimilate into American culture. Okay. What does assimilate mean? It means to get the Ahadis, my family, on their feet so they can be self-sufficient. Okay? Why is this important? What does self-sufficiency actually mean? The 1980s was a very interesting time in the world, in the trajectory of the human existence. It was a very interesting time. Why? The 1980s, I would argue, is one of the last decades, probably the last decade before globalization took over. So there's still pockets of the world that were super isolated, to include Carlisle, Pennsylvania. What is an indication that it was a very isolated place? First, there weren't any mosques. 2, there wasn't any basmati rice. 3, there wasn't any turmeric. 4, there wasn't any cardamom. 5, there wasn't any cumin. What are these things? These are things not only that we consume, but they essentially create this sense of home and belonging. When you have to describe your home to somebody, my guess is you will talk about food. Or this is how you know you miss home. If you go away and you think about America, you think, man, when I get back, I can't wait to have a hamburger or a Reuben or a pizza or whatever that thing is. People are deeply attracted to their foods because it reminds them of, I would argue, their mother or their homes. There's a comfort in the smell of your kitchen. At least there was in my home. And there was in my parents' home. So when my parents first got to America, they weren't asking, hey, how do we find a phone so we can call our family? They were saying, hey, where can we find the rice that we like? Where can we find the flavors that remind us of the place that we were raised? And what's interesting about this time is that people at this time, there wasn't Google. For the young people in this room, before there was Google, there was something called the Encyclopedia Britannica. Do you guys remember that? Do you guys know the encyclopedia? You may even have a series in your home. Right? You may be one of those people that's like, no, this will come into use one day. Who knows? Why is this important? The Encyclopedia Britannica, right, was where people would go to find information about different things or different places or different statistics that they needed to know about. And Afghanistan made it to the Encyclopedia Britannica, but it was like, this is how it relates to the American notion of what it means to be a country as it pertains to the American filter of the world. So what do I mean? There's America and then there's the rest of the world. This is the 1980s. Okay, this is the 1980s. I would argue that's no longer the case, but the 1980s was very much this. So as we're trying to assimilate into American culture, these families were responsible for helping us with that process. So what did that look like? My father knew a little bit of English. Hello, how are you? So my parents, to this day, only speak functional English. Functional English. What is functional English? Okay. I like your shirt. You look very happy. Where can I buy some basmati rice? How do I pay my taxes? What are taxes? What is FAFSA? I don't understand. What is voting? What is, filibuster? This is functional English, right? This is functional English. My parents, to this day, they don't know how to speak emotional English. And this may resonate with some of you who may not have English as your first language, or may know somebody where English isn't their first language. What that means to you is that they probably don't speak emotional English. So, now that I'm an adult, and I'm the bridge between my brothers and my parents, because my brothers don't speak Farsi and I do, and my parents don't speak emotional English, so I'm the bridge between my brothers and my parents. Both sets of parties always convene and say, what do they actually mean? One family, two different notions of being. This happens to a lot of immigrant families that come here. And America is a very interesting place because the moment you come here, kids want to be American right away. It's something that's very interestingly cool about America. And cool is a very interesting word because it can mean anything. And parents hate the word cool because it literally goes against everything they want their kids to know. But yet kids want it and they actually gravitate toward it. It's very interesting. So America is really interesting because the moment you get here, not only does America in some sense want you to be American, but young people want to be American too. It's fantastically interesting how that works. So why do I share this with you? So as my parents are starting to learn English, right? Work. My dad's first job was working as one of these cart collectors in the supermarket where it'd be raining and snowing and there'd be wind, but not as much wind as here. And they'd be collecting carts and bringing them inside. And my mother at the time was learning to become a hairstylist. Afghans, again, countries like Afghanistan, people work with their hands. And so my parents were very good with their hands to this day. So now they essentially were throwing themselves at this type of work. And so what's interesting is, as I'm thinking about my mother, she would take us everywhere that she went. Here in America, if you have the ability to, you outsource motherhood. It's an interesting experience, right? So the way you can kind of wrap language around it is there's mothers with children, and then their mothers to children, right? And so what's interesting is my mother was a mother to her children. So everywhere she would go, whether it was a supermarket, the bank, to school, she would literally take two boys with her everywhere. And I just remember being like, why am I at the barbershop? Why am I at the church? Why am I here when you're cleaning toilets, Mom? I just remember this being my existence. And as I talk to my friends now about their lifestyles, it wasn't that for them. So it's an interesting way to kind of understand not only socioeconomics, but understand my mother's notion of what it meant to be a mother. Because when she tells people about her upbringing in terms of raising us this way, she's proud about it. She's proud that she was able to do that. And she doesn't ever want people to be like, oh, that's so sad, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. And so the lesson that my mother taught me now as an adult of that time is that there is pride in hardship. There is pride in being that person to your children, even if it means not getting as much sleep, even if it means they don't get to play with all the kids all the time. It's a wonderful experience. I still to this day thank my mother for that. So, what was my mother learning from one of these families that was essentially responsible for my mother? Because my mother, at this point, like, she never really left her neighborhood. She went to Pakistan, then she's in the United States. It's really interesting. So my mother didn't know really any English. And my mother didn't understand basic technologies. What do I mean by technology? In particular, like female technologies. Female, like sanitary pads, shaving legs, all these things that like women use to be healthy, right? My mother came from a world where that wasn't the case. So Emily Miller was in charge of essentially helping my mom do all these things. And to this day, my mother and Emily Miller have a wonderful relationship. And so these were the types of things that these families were essentially responsible for helping my parents learn so they could be as self-sufficient as soon as possible. And what's interesting is now that I'm kind of writing my memoir and like talking to my parents from the perspective of not only being their son but being their friend, I asked my parents a couple interesting questions. What was it like for you to leave a country where your formative years shaped your worldview and come to a place that didn't resemble New York City, that in some sense resembled Kandahar more than it resembled anything else? Because if you know anything about Carlisle, Pennsylvania, this may be kind of interesting for you. This is a funny joke that my dad thinks God played on us, is that once we get off the plane in Harrisburg, do you guys know Lancaster County? Have you guys ever heard of Lancaster County? Lancaster County is where the Amish live. And the Amish have big beards and they dress in black. And my dad's from Kandahar, where people wear big beards and dress in black. So we get into the car and we're driving through these cornfields, getting into Carlisle here and there. And he's like, what the hell is going on? Are these people American? What is the deal? They look like people from my homeland. Actually, my hometown. And so to this day, my dad's like, the world is so interesting because you step into places that in some sense may be closer to home than you actually know. Right? Anyway, and the funny thing about it is my dad thinks like God played a funny little joke on him. You can't leave Afghanistan. It's following you everywhere you go. So I asked my father, as part of this learning process in terms of writing my family's story, is what was it like for you to essentially come to a place where people are not only, they don't look like you, they don't smell like you, they don't talk like you, they don't act like you, there's nothing similar about them to you, and their faith is different. What is that like? This is a question I posed to my father. And he said, son, at first I was really just going into it from a place of curiosity because these people signed up to help us. These people signed up to help us. Never in my life, in my own home country, did people sign up to help each other. The notion of service doesn't exist in Afghanistan because people are always working for themselves. In the context of the United States, what's wonderful about America is there is a culture of volunteerism in America. If you ask your friends from other parts of the world and you ask them, what is the culture of volunteerism in your country, you'd be surprised what they say. My guess is a lot of countries don't have it to the same extent that America does. So these people volunteered to take care of us. They come from a different faith tradition. They come from a different cultural tradition. And so the idea that my father shared with me in this instance was St. Paul's Lutheran Church accepted us without any judgment. They didn't care that my mother didn't speak English. They didn't care that my parents didn't understand how to drive or pay taxes. My parents for the longest time didn't want to pay taxes. It didn't map to their worldview because the government and where they came from didn't serve its people. So why would you pay the government if they're not going to give you anything? So in this notion of my parents learning, they learned from St. Paul's that you have to accept those that come from a place without any judgment. And in fact, not just that, but also engage people with a deep sense of curiosity because they teach you more about not them, but about how you are in relationship to them. Who am I as Baktash in relationship to Bernie? Who am I in relationship to Ken? And then subsequently, what is my relationship to the world? And so if we are trying to essentially be in a place where people want to be better, we have to ask questions not of other people, but of us in relationship to them. And that's the lesson in that interaction. My dad told me is that people not only came to us without judgment, but they were deeply curious about us. They were curious in terms of what's it like for you. Not only did my parents learn how to speak English that way, but they learned how to share their stories that way. The other thing that this experience kind of shaped, kind of helped my parents better understand is I asked my mom, I said, Mom, why is it that you accepted all of this help? There's one thing to need it, but there's a different thing to kind of accept. You know people in your own lives that need help, but they don't accept help. Why? It's a very important question. So I asked my mom that. Why did you accept their help? You were already in America at the time. And she said something really beautiful. She said, son, you can never choose. You never get to choose many things in your life. She said, you don't get to choose where you're born. You don't get to choose the family you're born into. You don't get to choose the language that you're born into. You don't even get to choose the faith that you're born into. In fact, you don't even get to choose your name at birth. And yet, people judge you on all of these things. And I thought to myself that was one fantastically insightful. She said, my parents didn't finish high school. My parents aren't educated. But they're wise because their relationship with time is always thinking long term. That's what wisdom is, by the way. Wisdom is, I believe, a different relationship with time where you essentially take action based on the long-term thinking of your actions, so the long-term implications of your actions. People that are smart but yet do stupid things, it's not that they're not smart. They just don't understand time the same way. Anyway, so my mother says this to me, and it made me realize that what she was doing is she was sharing that she was nobody in relationship to them. Who was she to judge them for not wanting to help her? One. Two, they too were in a place where they didn't get to choose any of these things either. But where is the choice? The choice is in that moment when you see somebody and they don't represent anything that you come from or anything that you may know. In those moments, we have the ability to choose, to be judgmental, and totally cast somebody off as something that you may perceive them to be. Or we have the choice to be completely curious about, wait a second, I know he didn't get to choose that body. I know he didn't get to choose even his name. Let me figure out how he makes sense of all that. In fact, let me ask a deeper question. How do you understand your lived experience? And this question is deeply interesting because I just spent the last year, as I'm writing my memoir, having what I like to call intimate conversations with people. Like, I'm very interested in intimacy as it pertains to understanding people's, not understanding what happens to people, but understanding the meaning that they give to the things that happen to them. So, what do I mean? Here's an example. I served in Afghanistan as a combat interpreter for 3 years. I went back post 9/11. I was attached to the Marines, and I went out on missions to go after the insurgency, to include the Taliban, as well as going out to build wells in villages, as well as construct schools. So I was part of the effort to kind of bring Afghanistan out of the darkness and into the light, so to speak. When I came back from Afghanistan, after being exposed to the good and the bad that war does to people, a few things happened. 3 of my friends that I served with in the Marines committed suicide. Okay. I had PTSD, so did my father. My father also went back to Afghanistan as a military interpreter, and he was an interpreter for 3 years as well. So my father and I came back and were like, what the hell's going on in America that our friends are committing suicide? What is this? This beautiful country where you can have anything that you want. And 2 things really, I came to 2 conclusions. One, it's not about what happens to you. It's about how you give meaning to the things that happen to you. So if you're in a firefight and you're experiencing conflict and your buddy dies in front of you, you have a choice to do one of 2 things. You can either say, man, I'm going to be hard on myself because I wasn't able to save my friend. And then you fall into this place of regret and depression and abuse of yourself and the relationships that you have. And then eventual suicide if you continue down that path. Right? It's a downward spiral. 4, not feeling like you were able to save the person that you were responsible for or be there when somebody needed you. Okay? That's one choice that leads to this outcome. The other choice is what? Is to say, God gave me another day. I was given another chance. My time, we say this in Farsi, waqtish purashur, which means his time was up. You can say, my time was not up today. I have another day. I was granted another day. So then, that's the perspective that I took. And that's why I'm an upbeat, positive, optimistic person, because I'm granted another day. So, this goes back to the idea of not necessarily what happens to you, but how you give meaning to the thing that happens to you. You can see it one of two ways. One leads to being bitter and resentful and then potentially really harmful to yourself and those around you. And the other is being completely grateful. And so I offer you this. Think about not what happens to you, but think about how you want to give meaning to the things that happen to you. That's wisdom. And that's not something that I came up with. If you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, you should. He says, and this Viktor Frankl is fantastically interesting. So just really quick thing about Viktor Frankl. He was in Auschwitz. He was a Jew who was in Auschwitz, and he lost everybody in his family, his wife, his mother, his children, everybody. He ended up making it out alive. And he wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning, and it sold, I think the most number of copies after the Bible, and then Mein Kampf, randomly. So it's the third most selling book in the world, I think. That's not important. What he says is this. He says, between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. And in that space exists freedom. And in that freedom, you have the ability to choose how you want to react to the stimulus. Everybody always has that choice. And so I share this with you because you have the choice to choose one of two things as it pertains to other people. You can either judge them and cast what you may perceive to know about them in their entire life history, or you can say, you know what? I am going to choose to be curious about this person instead. Maybe I can learn something from them. Maybe I can learn something about myself in relationship with them. Because we always have a choice. We always have a choice. And then on top of that, the other thing that my parents and our lived experience taught me in terms of being in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, the place of my childhood, and the place in which 9/11 kind of happened, and all of a sudden we went from trying to be American as soon as possible to only being understood as being Afghan. It's interesting how people label you based on how they want to label you, based on the circumstances in the world. It's an interesting thing. So after the Soviet Union fell in 1980, after the Soviet Union left in 1989 from Afghanistan, people forgot about Afghanistan, and the Soviet Union essentially collapsed in 91. It was an interesting time in the world. And so we understood that we weren't going to go back to Afghanistan. And so we tried to be as American as possible, as soon as possible. We wanted to be cool. I changed my name from Baktash to Bak because I thought that was cool. Right? The word cool is very interesting. It makes you do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. Such an interesting thing. Nonetheless, 9/11 happens, and I no longer can run away from the place I was born into. Why? There was a gap whereby people wanted to know what was happening in the world, and they would ask me as though I had the answers. Baktash, you're from Afghanistan. What the hell's going on over there? Why are people acting this way? Are they really jealous? Do they want to destroy our civilization? I'm 18, 19 years old. So what would I do? I'd call my mom, my dad, be like, Mother, Baba, what should I say? And they're like, Bachim, we don't really know. Let us think about it. Nonetheless, there was a sense of responsibility that I was expected to fulfill, and so I did. And so the question that I essentially pursued post 9/11 is, why do people do what they do? And these are the lessons that I've learned, is people do things based on their lived experience, and people do things based on the way in which they're programmed at a very young age. Right? So I asked this question of Lisa earlier. It's like, do you, specifically, you as a person, do you hold a value that, regardless of where you go in the world, whether it's Costa Rica, Germany, South Africa, or Mars, is there a chance that you would give up that value? And my sense is no. Whether it's the freedom of speech, whether it's a love for your family, whether it's understanding gender dynamics, whether it's understanding your relationship to your son, whether it's understanding your responsibility of your son for you. These things are programmed into you from a cultural perspective at a very young age. And it's very hard to shake those things. Human beings are like computers. Every time you upload software, the software may upload, but the hardware doesn't. You know what I'm talking about? And then all of a sudden, if you don't upload all of a sudden, and you try to upload all at once, it crashes. Human beings, in some sense, are like that too. So, let's go back to my parents. There are things that are happening in America now where I ask my parents how they feel about it, right? Extreme individualism, suicide, drug use, jumping out of airplanes for fun. They don't understand why people do that. Why would you pay money to do something that's risking your life? We spent all our life risking our lives. Why would you do that? Or roller coasters. They don't understand roller coasters. Why would you pay $45 to be scared and then throw up afterwards? My parents also don't understand alcohol consumption. Why would you go pay money, a lot of money, to do something that you regret, and then you throw up, and then your friends tell you about the next day and you don't remember? Why would you do this? Why do you pay for these things? But they don't understand these things, right? So my parents are a fantastically interesting mirror to kind of throw some ideas against to see what sticks. But nonetheless, these are some of the lessons my parents taught me about life. And I want you guys to think about this as you guys kind of navigate the world, whether it's online or in person. This is the thing that kind of helps me, is to say, who am I? What's the relationship I want to have with myself? What's the relationship I want to have with the world? How do I want to grow? What do I want to be remembered for? And what is the thing that I want people to say about me when I essentially leave one day? And if you start asking these real questions about yourself, you will actually be a better person. You will actually be a better person. You'll be more empathetic. You'll be more open. You'll be less judgmental. You'll be more curious. Like, I do this as a practice now. I literally ask myself, how do I want to be in relationship with John, with Dustin, with my parents? And it literally opens this gate where you can essentially have an intimate conversation with people, tell you about, you know what, Baktash, when I first met you, I thought you were one of those people. Tell me about that. What kind of people? Let's talk about that. What kind of people? And I don't do it from a place of judgment, but I do it from a place of, let's talk about what you think you understood about me before you met me. And that's a real conversation, because all of a sudden people will share if you allow them to. And you know what's interesting? Is people want you to say that to them too. Because what's interesting is, you probably don't actually know how people perceive you until you ask them. I think I said this to Di the other day. It's a fantastically important thing to kind of do, not only to yourself, but also with your family. As I'm writing my memoir, I'm doing this with my parents. This may be something that I'll share with you, and then we'll come to a close and we can open up for conversation. Is I'm asking my parents some really interesting things, because what's interesting about the world is, can you name an instance where you weren't the protagonist of the film that you're watching? You can't. You were the protagonist of this film as you're listening to me. What's he doing with his hands? Why is he wearing those pants? He's got funny hair. Why do he wear that shirt? I wonder what his mom looks like. I wonder how his mom cooks. These are maybe some thoughts you're having. Right? Nonetheless, you are the protagonist of the film that's going on in your mind. So, what's interesting is, you ever watch a film? I make films too. You ever watch a film? There's a frame, and there's another frame, there's another frame. It's showing you one perspective. What's it not showing you? Everything back here. And everything back here is life. It's all the things that culminated this scene. And you're the protagonist in this scene. And what's really interesting to kind of do is to say, Mom, Dad, I really love you. I'm writing my memoir. I've done this. I'm doing this. I'm writing my memoir from my perspective as I'm understanding my relationship with you when I was a kid, and I really didn't like you at that time. It's not to say I didn't love my parents. It's simply to say I didn't like them. There's a difference. You can love somebody and not like them. You can love your children and not like your kids. You can love your parents and not like your parents too. So, to be fair to them, I said, Mom, Dad, I'm writing our family memoir from my perspective. I'm writing about the times in which you made me feel ashamed, or you made me feel small, or you made me feel like I didn't count, or you didn't love me the way I wanted you to love me. But I want to be fair to you. I want you to ask those questions of me too. And giving them the permission to essentially ask these questions of me, and then having them talk honestly about those things, has changed my entire relationship, not just with my parents, but my entire family to include my siblings. For example, let me give you one example. I said, Mom, Dad, when was the time that I broke your heart? It's an interesting question. Because you can think about the time that your parents broke your heart, I'm sure. I'm sure. But do you know the time in which you broke your parents' heart? I would guess a lot of people here don't know that. So I asked my parents, and my mother said a wonderfully beautiful thing. And her response changed my entire behavior with my brothers. She said, Bachem means my son. She said, Bachem, you know, when you fight with your brothers and you argue with your brothers, it's as though pieces of my heart are broken. It's as though my heart is broken. You don't understand yet because you don't have children, but your children are like pieces of your heart. When they're happy and they're healthy and they're laughing together, your heart is whole. When they're fighting and they're not getting along, it's as though your heart is broken. And the moment she said that, the moment that landed in my mind, I completely changed my behavior and my attitude toward my brothers, not just with them, but especially in relationship to my parents. So what is this demonstrating to us? We actually don't know the people that we're in relationship with. How is it possible that we could potentially know somebody that we're not in relationship with? The people that brought you into this world, you may not know their deepest, darkest thoughts about the person that they brought into the world, that being you. How is it that we can judge people that came from a place that we barely even know and judge them for things that we perceive to understand about them? So, if you remember anything about this conversation, the thing that I would love for you to take away is explore this inner landscape. Wyoming is a beautiful place, and people talk about the landscape here. And you go and you throw yourself at it, and you live off of it, and you work from it. But what I would offer to you is explore your inner landscape. What are the things that you don't understand about yourself? And what are the things that you really want to know? Ask the people that know you, because you know what? If you accept their answers without judgment, they will actually tell you, and that exchange will elevate your relationship with those people in your life to a place of actual honesty, growth, and I think that's what it means to be an adult. Okay, any questions? Yeah, so that's kind of how that's how I'm working through my memoir right now, is asking my parents these questions, because I've just never given them the space to do so. Anyway, I'm not sure if that was too heavy, or I can't really see your faces. Yeah. But anyway, what questions do you have? What would you like to talk about? Yes. Yes.
Thank
Hi.
you for coming, and I'm so glad I found out yesterday.
I know, man.
The question I have, we're living in strange, unconventional times for many of us. I don't know that any of us really here has any personal recollection of the last time something like a global pandemic happened, right? That has really it has constricted in some ways, in very meaningful ways, the relationships we have with other human beings, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think I know you just well enough to know that what's important to you are those personal relationships, okay? Those connections you have with the people around you, okay? Whether you know them or not, and even especially in the cases, for example, for me, getting to know you without really having a lot of time to do it. There's something about that sense of what is important to you in terms of those individual personal relationships. So my question is, because of the times that we're living in, and hopefully we're getting to the point where we're exiting this particular period of time, where we've obliged ourselves, or we've been obliged to separate ourselves physically from those around us. Sometimes family, but certainly, people generally. I'm just curious, what kinds of observations or lessons you've learned for yourself in this time about what's important to you, and that is the relationships that you have with people around you.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. Okay. What have I learned about myself in this space? Yeah. Oh gosh, what a lovely question. I'm deeply sensitive. I'm very sensitive, and I'm actually very interested. I'm interested in people because for the longest time, people weren't interested in me. What do I mean? I'm going to tell you something very interesting. When I was a kid and I came to America in the 1980s, I kind of painted this this picture of America being very, where I was raised, was very isolated. But I talked about it in terms of food and religion. Let me talk about it from my own lived experience and not my family's experience, my own lived experience. So when I was a kid going into grade school, you wouldn't believe this about me now, but I was a deeply shy person. And I was shy because, one, I didn't know English, but two, I didn't know how to navigate in the world. What do I mean? My parents as immigrants to this country who weren't educated, my parents don't come from the upper class society of Afghanistan. In fact, we're Muslim Shias, we're the minority in Afghanistan, and so the minority in Afghanistan, the Shia minority, if you kind of practiced your religion in public, you would have been persecuted, if not worse, died. You would have been killed. And so my parents were fantastically good at hiding things from the public that they didn't want to be known. So why is this important? When we came to America, my parents didn't, in some sense, guide me or teach me to be like the other kids. What's interesting about children is their innocence. That's their beauty. It's also their detriment. Their beauty is their innocence, and their detriment is their innocence. My parents thought, oh, our sons, they're in school now, they'll just learn like the other kids. What my parents didn't understand is how mean kids can be. In particular, mean not because of what somebody else does, but mean because of who somebody else is. That's an important distinction. As adults, we take actions hopefully based on what somebody does, not who they are or what they look like. Kids don't know that difference. I didn't know that difference. So as a young child, when people gave me attention, it was always negative attention. I used to get beat up on the school grounds all the time. All the time. And what's really interesting is I kind of dig back into my memory, and I think about my memory is I remember that I don't remember crying. I used to get beat up and I don't remember crying. What is that? What does that say about who I was then? And the meaning that I give to that experience, and the only thing that I can kind of come to is that it is the thing that I believe I deserved. And so, this is the thing, I shared this the other day, but I'll share it again too. This may help just kind of, not only for you to understand me, but maybe understand yourself. I'm convinced that everybody in life has what's called, what I would like to call a fundamental sin. It's the thing in your life that connects who you are now to some event that happened in your childhood or in your life where you feel like you weren't strong enough, you weren't courageous enough, or you did something that you regret and you can't put it all together. There's a pattern. There are a couple things in your life that keep showing up for you. And until you take a moment and kind of really think about what that thing is, you may just think, oh, it's who I am. But there's a reason for who you are. In some sense, there's a biological element to you, but there's also a lived experience to you. That idea of not feeling like I deserved better stayed with me my entire life. I'm not going to go talk to that girl because you know what? She's way above. She's out of my league. Maybe some of the boys in this room will feel that. A feeling of inadequacy. Or I don't deserve that job, so I'm not going to apply. Or if my boss is harassing me, I'm not going to say anything. Or I don't deserve that seat because you know what? I didn't feel like I deserved it when I was a kid. It stems, it comes, it shows up. This thing shows up for all of us. And if you dig deep into your psychology, there's probably something there for you too. So this time where I've spent a lot of time alone in 2020, I've learned this about myself. I've learned that this is who I am, and that my parents weren't able to give me the language and the wherewithal to better understand and navigate that world because they themselves were trying to figure it out. They lost everything, came here with nothing, and all of a sudden they're in this world that resembles nothing of what they know. They didn't have the mental capacity to say, son, when somebody picks on you, make sure you kick them and punch back. Make sure you tell your teacher. They didn't believe in rights. They don't know that. That wasn't part of their lexicon. It wasn't told to me as a kid, you have the right to do this, you have the right to do that. That is what all kids tell you now at the age of 3. I have the right to have an access to a Game Boy, or I have the right to go to school, or this is my room, don't come into my room, mom and dad. This is like what happens, right? This wasn't part of the lexicon of how I was raised. So this affected me very differently. And so that's the realization I came to in this last year, is that I'm deeply sensitive based on what happened to me as a kid. And so because I wasn't seen as a kid, now I'm in a place to be deeply curious about other people, because all I wanted as a kid was to be seen and engaged in a positive way. And so now when I engage with people, I'm always thinking to myself, maybe something terrible happened to them too. Or maybe they're suffering in a way that I have no idea, or I can't even wrap my mind around. And so my sense of curiosity about people comes from a place of empathy. Because I remember that childhood that I had, and I thought to myself, man, like right now I tell people my life goal is to be the hero that I wish I had when I was a kid. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that helps.
Maybe that's helpful for other people, but I think that's what I've learned about me.
Can I follow up really quickly?
Yeah, you can dig as much as you want. Man.
And sorry, I don't want to.
Yeah, sure.
What have you learned about other people, kind of generally? Are there any kind of observations or kind of insights that you've learned about other human beings because of the peculiarities of the circumstances that we've lived under in this past year?
That's a great question.
I'm done, so.
No, it's a great question. I think people, in some sense, we're all very lonely. Even when we're with somebody that we know, whether they're related to us, or we've been married to them, or we've produced a child with them, or whatever the case may be, we in some sense are deeply lonely because that person can only fulfill certain needs that we have. We have friends and colleagues and other elements of our lives that fulfill different needs. And if we're being honest, that's what it means to be a complete human being. No one person can be everything to you. It's impossible, if we're going to be honest. So this last year, I think in some sense, it's fair to say that, including me, we're all in some sense, very lonely. Because we don't have the space or the relationships to be the person that we are. And it's important to say that because in your relationship with your wife, you are one person or a type of person. She may have seen different variations of who you are in that space. But when you're with your college buddies, or in a classroom, or somewhere else, a different version or variation of you shows up, doesn't it? That is no longer with us. You can't be that person to the same extent in the relationship you are with your wife. You'll be unrecognizable in some sense. You may do it once or twice and they're like, stop doing that, that's not cool. Or I don't know you, why do you keep doing that? Maybe this has happened to you. And so, in some sense, we're dealing with a grief of the person that we were, that we no longer can be because that space no longer exists. So in some sense, we're all dealing with that, I think. I've dealt with it. You may have dealt with it too, and so you may get more frustrated, more agitated as a result because you're like, man, what is this thing that I'm feeling? I don't know what it is. I think that's it. I think that's the thing that we're all dealing with. Grandparents that can't see their parents, elders that can't see their grandchildren, what is that? I can't even imagine. Like you were living in many ways for that next generation. You can't see them. Doesn't that feel like grief in terms of loss in some capacity? So I think that's a unifying thing. What do you guys think? What else shows up for you guys? That's a very good question. What else shows up? I'm curious to know what you guys think. Anyway, one other thing. I think the importance of conversation too is to know that we're not crazy. So, what do I mean? It's important to ask, What is the definition of crazy? You know it, you know it, you know it, you know it, you know it. You know crazy when you see crazy. Great. Explain crazy to me as though I was a 6-year-old. Sir.
What I was just going to say is recognizing crazy in myself and not acting on it is I know, especially when there's nothing left to lose. Like when, if not so much when because of the pandemic, but for instance, when you retire, you don't have to answer to the man, and you've got your situation taken care of somewhat in life, and you've served your country or whatever the case may be. You've adhered to the law and whatever the case may be, and all of a sudden you don't have to stay quiet anymore. You can voice your opinion, or you feel like you can, without retribution. And so a guy shows up at your front door, and he's an unsatisfactory front door salesman, and you don't like that, and you say, no, thank you, I'm not interested, 3 or 4 times, and he doesn't get the message, and pretty soon you snap, and you just don't care anymore. So you don't care, and so that's crazy.
Okay, I understand. That was a good example. Who was the unsatisfactory salesperson in the room that went to his door? No, I'm sharing this because it's the purpose of conversation. It's the purpose of conversation. One, I believe conversation is the tool for better understanding. It's not through lecture, it's not through film, it's through engagement. 1. 2, the other purpose of conversation, this is why relationships are really important, is to say, Sally, this is what's going on in my head, this is what's going on in my relationship. Is this normal to you? Have you ever said, like, does this make sense? Why is this part of our lexicon? It's because we're trying to determine whether or not the thing that's going on in our head actually maps to reality. To be crazy means, in some sense, the thing that's going on in somebody's head, whether they're schizophrenic, somebody suffering from dementia, or you name that thing, doesn't map to a preconceived notion of what reality is collectively. There's a gap, and the bigger that gap is, the crazier that person is. And so, in some sense, we are a little crazy because we're always trying to map our ideas to that perceived sense of reality. Hence the reason why we always have to ask, does this make sense? Hey, I'm going through this thing at work. Can we talk about it? I need to voice this out. Because you're doing it so you realize you're not alone in this fight or this situation, but also to realize, like, you're not losing your mind. That's the purpose of conversation. And so what I advocate is, if you're sick of Zoom calls, I understand. They suck. They suck. But you know what's amazing? Is getting on the phone, reaching out to a friend you haven't talked to in a while, and saying, you know what, let's just talk and do your thing. Being on the phone's fantastic because we were all raised, maybe not everybody, but I was raised on the phone. There's a sense of liberty because you can be who you are, how you want to be. But what's beautiful about the phone is people hear what you have to say, so you can test the things that are going on in your mind. Right? That's the purpose of conversation. If you could do it in person, even better, because what's beautiful about face-to-face conversation is people are very good at lying sometimes. Why is this important? Like, if I say something like, hey, I love pizza and chocolate, how do you think about it? And the person may want to please me, and they'll say, yeah, it's really great, but their face says, yeah, it's really great. They can't control their facial reactions. And so in person's even better because you get more data points to understand how you are in relation to that person. But a conversation is very important. So, sir, what I recommend to you is, it's okay to lose your cool. It's okay. I think that's actually quite normal. I think, again, remember, there's that idea of we can always choose how we want to respond. In that space, there's ability to choose how you want to kind of react. You could lose it and say, hey, man, get the hell out of here. You're not hearing what I have to say. Or you could do something else. But I think what I'm trying to say is your reaction isn't crazy. Right? Being frustrated is not a crazy thing. Yeah. Somebody said something back there. Yeah, so what are the questions you guys have? That was a good one. I appreciate that one about change. And yeah, yes, please.
Where do your parents live now?
Yeah, my parents still live in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Really?
Yeah, they love it. They love it. They want me to come back and buy a little house and have some pets and a couple kids for them to take care of. I'm in that space now where I'm thinking about it, so.
Pets or kids to take care of?
Yeah.
What's that?
Do they want to take care of your pets or your kids?
Everything. They're now retired and they don't have anything to do, so instead of losing it on the salesman, what they want to do is use that energy on their grandchildren. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, my parents, so let me share something else about my parents because it'll kind of give you an idea in terms of about like their notion of America and how they see America. So what's interesting about my situation is like I can look at American culture with one foot in, one foot out because I'm always looking at it as though I was never part of it growing up. I observed it, but I was never in it because the world showed me that I wasn't in it. My name, my language, I invite people over to my house. Bro, what's up with your house? What's up with your parents? There's always indications that you're not in it. It's okay. It's great, actually. It's okay. And then when I go to Afghanistan, they too would be like, hey, man, you're not fully Afghan. What the hell are you? You don't speak like us fully. You walk like Americans. You eat like, what the hell's going on? So I'm not fully Afghan. So it's an interesting place to understand that culture too because I can speak to it from an anthropological lens. Anyway, my parents, before COVID took over the world, my parents were dealing with low-level depression. Low-level depression. And so I got my dad on some medication, Bubba, like you can trust this doctor. He's Indian. It's okay, His name's Raju. Afghans have a, proclivity to trust Indian doctors for some reason. I think it's the Bollywood effect. Anyway, so my parents are going through low-level depression because they came to America for their children, right? They gave up their lives. They could have stayed in that part of the world and lived their lives for themselves and had us live there, but they came here mostly for us. They sacrificed for us. And they love the fact that their children go to school because they couldn't. They love the fact that they help their kids with school because they didn't have that growing up. So there's a major sense of responsibility they loved about being here and being parents to their children. What they hated, though, was after college. What's wonderful about America is there's so much opportunity. But what does opportunity do? It takes you to Orange County, Washington, D.C., New York City. It takes you to the place where you get the best opportunities, financially, professionally. So if you go to school, you may leave. And if you're lucky, you may come back too. But that's not likely. Most kids leave and they go away, right? You may be dealing with this. You're nodding very, very much. So my parents raised us in Carlisle. We went off to school. Went off to schools in the East Coast and the West Coast. And then my brothers and I went to Mozambique and served in the Peace Corps. My one brother went to Japan. The other one went to Silicon Valley. And my parents were like, great, this is awesome. When are you moving back home? And we're like, Mother, but we're not moving back to Carlisle. Mind you, Carlisle is very much like Rock Spring. Population's about 20,000. Some of the same things that we kind of talked about in terms of how people live their lives here very much resemble Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So it's very interesting to be here because in some sense I feel like I'm talking to people from Carlisle. People in Carlisle, once they go to school, once they leave, they don't really come back unless they want to have kids of their own. Maybe, or if they have land that their parents want to give to them or something. So my parents started to realize, like, maybe we did something wrong. Our kids got educated, they went to school, they're going to places like Mozambique, they're going to places like Japan. What the hell did we do wrong? They, in their mind, in their upbringing, their formatting in terms of the way they were raised, people in Afghanistan or people from that part of the world would go away to school, but they'd always come back. They'd always come back to the family, because the family is where you get your sense of belonging, a sense of home and belonging. So what's interesting in the context of the lexicon of America is we always talk about this idea of home and belonging, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're trying to create homes in offices and organizations that we don't have necessarily around us because our families are elsewhere. Have you ever thought about it in those terms? It's an interesting thing. And so my parents, they were just like, we don't know what to do because we don't know what we did wrong. Why don't you come back home? And it's like, Mom, Dad, we love you, but there's no jobs in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We can't live the lives that we want in Pennsylvania. So my parents' sense of depression came from being isolated, from not having their kids close. So they, like you maybe, sir, they've retired, they don't know what to do. And so what we do is now, adult kids, is we bring them out to where we are, or we go to visit them as often as possible. Every day I call my mom. I just have to do it. This may sound crazy to some people in this room. I'll send my mom a text with a heart or a flower, something. Something. I think people do that to their wives. I'm not married yet, so I don't know. But I do that to my mom because she has to feel like I'm thinking about her. Because at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know what it's like to be a parent, but I can't imagine what it's like to not have somebody think about you when you brought them into this world. That's just a guess. Yeah, sir.
You mentioned not walking, that you walked like an American. What
Yeah.
do Americans walk like?
Who here has been to the Far East? Who here has been to the Far East? Great, great. So this will resonate with you. In places like Tokyo and Beijing, right, this is a reference point. They walk like this. You ever notice? They walk like this. Why do you think that happens?
Shoes.
Is it the shoes? Okay, let me show you how Americans walk. Let me show you how Americans walk. Let me show you how Americans walk. Chest up, wide gait. I think it's what we call in English, wide gait. What's the difference?
Population.
Thank you. It's about the economies of space. In the Far East, the population is so much that they can't walk like an American in Tokyo. You literally step on people's heels. It's disrespectful. You cause problems. But in America, what's beautiful about America? We're in Wyoming. I drove from Jackson to Rock Spring, and what did I see? Only land and horses. Oh, only land and horses. Only land and horses. America is a fantastically beautiful country because it's so big. So in America, what's wonderful about America is people talk about the square footage of their homes as though it's a modicum of success. Really, your house is 5,000 square feet. Amazing. What they don't realize is if they have 5,000 square feet of home, they have to fill it up with stuff. That's why IKEA is $1 billion company. It's all Americans who buy this stuff, man. It's not people from Sweden, I promise you. So my father, what's interesting is my father, when he went back to Afghanistan, he would walk as though he hadn't been in the country for a while. And people would come and speak to him in English, Afghans, in Kandahar, the city of his birth and his upbringing. And after a while, it wasn't one person, it wasn't two people, it was like 10 people. He goes up to the last person that speaks to him in English. He says, hey, man. He says to him in Pashto, he says, hey, why are you speaking to me in English? And he goes, I know that you came from the United States. And my dad, who's wearing traditional Afghan clothes, has the traditional hat, has some facial hair, he said, how can you tell? Look at me. My dad's skin's it's much darker than mine. And the guy stood to him, I can tell based on the way you walk. Because my dad started walking like an American. Space. So I urge you to think about, again, human beings and culture in some sense dictate, or at least very much inform how people are. Not only how they, for example, here's another question. Why do you think Afghans eat on the floor? Or some cultures eat on the floor? Why do Americans not eat on the floor? Let me give you a guess. There is wood in Afghanistan. There is wood. What is the why? Why does this happen? You ever think about it? And the answer isn't culture. So when I ask a why question, you can't give me a what response. You have to give me a why response. Why do people eat off the ground in a place like Afghanistan? What do you think?
More nomadic existence?
One more time?
A nomadic existence?
That's what it precisely. So what does that mean?
They were traveling too much, you can't have a lot of things.
Precisely, nomads. Exactly. And so that stayed. Also, too, when you think about an Afghan home, it's only really two rooms. Right? Exactly. It's about the economies of space. Again, you'll have 2 rooms, and in these 2 rooms you eat, sleep, host, get married, have kids. You'll like watch movies. Have you guys ever watched movies and you're like, wait a second, there are 9 people in this bedroom. There are literally 9 people in this bedroom. What is going on? It's because they don't have more rooms based on their nomadic origins. And it's not to say that didn't happen here in the context of the United States. The context of the United States takes a little different, the trajectory is a little different. But in Afghanistan, since the culture lives in the past, they maintain certain things from the past. American culture is very much future-oriented. This is an example of how future-oriented America is. Oh, Steve, it's so good to see you. You just got back from Panama. How was it? Steve may have 22 seconds to say how Panama was. And then after that, Steve, great, what are you doing next? Great, what are you going to do with this degree or this education or this experience that you had? Great. What's next? It's literally part of our culture. How was, I don't know, Salt Lake City? Oh, great, yeah. Great, what are you doing next week? Great. When are you going to be able to retire? When are you going to be done with your degree? It's always future-oriented, which is why, coming from the culture that I come from, which is very much steeped in the past, people in the context of the United States, maybe here there is this, but how many people in this room know their grandmother's maiden name? Yeah, you guys are great here. You guys are great here. I asked this question in Washington, D.C., and everyone's like, oh, no. Okay. But here's another question. How many people in this room know how their parents actually fell in love? Great. How about your grandparents on either side? Great. Why is this an interesting question? In the context of Afghanistan, when you sit down and you're with family, everything about your existence and your identity is what your great-great-great-grandpa did. And what he did, you have to uphold. And to be honorable means to maintain what they did. In the context of the United States, it's not like that. People rarely talk about how they got to Rock Springs. If they do, it's like over the course of maybe 5 dinners, 6 dinners, bas khalas, full stop. That's my experience, at least. People in America want to know what you're doing. They want to know what you're doing as a matter of what you will bring into the world or what you will produce or what you will create. What are you doing? Not what you did necessarily. And so language in some sense determines our relationship with time, which then determines our values in this culture. So I want to, when you kind of are in conversation with people, take notice in terms of what people ask you, because that'll determine what they value in that culture. In Afghanistan, people rarely ask me what my name is. They say, who's your grandfather? They don't even care what my name is. Does that happen here? No, you were John Smith, who went to this school, who owns this plot of land. Great. Go run for senator. Awesome. Yeah. So understand your relationship with time is really important too. Good. What other questions? Yes.
What is your perspective on the divisiveness in our country right now? Not just politically, but basically philosophically.
Very, very big question. I will share some thoughts. I have no answers. The divisiveness of America is not only happening here. Okay, it's happening all over the world. Okay, what's interesting now is the way in which information is being brought to us, it's so sensationalized that we can't fathom other things that are happening outside of America, right? It's just really sensational. I think that's part of the Trump phenomenon. I think that's in conjunction with the way technology works and the way misinformation works and the way the algorithms and these social media platforms work and the way the business model with the media companies is set up. They're all geared to essentially capture your attention. That's what we often forget is everybody is fighting for your attention. Your kids, your wife, your TV, your phone, your clerk. Everybody's fighting for your attention. And so how do you get people's attention? You have to be more sensational. You have to be more sensational. So you have to, in some sense, export fear. You have to, in some sense, export something that people are literally going to drop their jaws to. That is the space that we're in because to make people fearful, to make people engaged, at least pay attention to what you're sharing with them, means to make money, means to capture their attention, right? You see this in restaurants. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Have you guys, pre-COVID, you guys like would go into a restaurant, you'd see a mother and a father and their 3 kids, and every last person's on a screen? They're not even paying attention to their food. Forget their mommy and their daddy. They're not even paying attention to the food that they're eating. Or, what's interesting is you'll see a mother and her infant, and the mother's like, talking to her phone, texting her girlfriend, sending photos of what just happened yesterday, and they're TikToking and this, that, and the other. That's one element. What's interesting is we don't actually know what's going to happen to that infant. Like all that infant understands is, I'm trying to get my mother's attention. She won't give it to me. This is a place of worrisome for me. That's what that infant's probably going through. But we don't know the long-term impacts of that. We don't know what this is going to do to us as a society. I think this is the beginning of this arc. So this idea of being divisive in America, I think people have to understand that everybody's trying to capture our attention, one. There is no national narrative anymore. The last time that I believe there was a national narrative was pre-social media, pre-Google, which is about 2004. 9/11 happened, 19 terrorists attack us, we're going to Afghanistan, we're going to Iraq. After that is when the splintering started to occur because of the advent and introduction of these technologies. And that's not to say that America wasn't divisive before, but now everybody is their own media channel. So they can essentially create pockets of people that are going to storm the Capitol, that are going to believe that the government is against them, that they're going to believe that Asians are the root of this virus, that live here. And so what we have to do in terms of the problem that I think we as a society have to face is, how do we teach our children to be critical thinkers? Because we can't stop this system. I don't think that's the solution. I don't think it's possible. I mean, Donald Trump now, he's going to create his own platform. And automatically have millions of people following him. And it's not just him. Other people around the world do this. So what we have to do in terms of a collective responsibility is say, this information that I'm getting, it's a diet. It's only one little sliver of what may exist as the truth. Did you hear all those conditional words that I just used in that sentence? So what we have to do, I think, is to say, how can we be better thinkers? How can we be more critical thinkers? How can I not judge this information based on my initial reaction? Because I think it's getting more and more dangerous to act based on one news source, whether it's CNN, whether it's Fox, whether it's your grandson, whether it's the local news. Yeah, I'm not sure if that helped, but that's kind of how I feel about it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I hate to ask this, but
Yeah, sure.
they don't teach critical thinking in schools. Where do you learn critical thinking?
From you, from our parents. We have to ask what it means to be a parent now. This is why I've waited so long to have kids. I want to start on this endeavor, but I'm so glad that I've waited because I'm an adult now. I think what happens is, I don't know, I just needed to wait. And so I think about what it means to be a father and what it means to be a mother, in particular my parents. Like, oh my gosh, what did they have to go through? But I think the responsibility now of parents is even more so. We have to say to our kids before information reaches them, whether it's a news source or a bad friend. You know what my parents' biggest fear was growing up? That their kids would have bad friends. My dad understood the power of cool. My dad understood the power of cool. So my father's biggest fear was me having a friend who was a drug dealer or would go rob a bank or something terrible, because that changes the trajectory of a child's life. Now that's not necessarily the case because everybody's in their bedroom, on their phones. And what's naive is parents to think, oh, my daughter's in her bedroom. She's okay. She's not going anywhere. My son's okay. He's fine. He's 14. He doesn't know left from right. He's not okay. He's actually not okay. So the responsibility, I believe, of parents is to say, sweetheart, let's have a conversation. You are going to be exposed to a lot of information. A lot of it's probably not going to be to your benefit. A lot of it. A lot of it. Whether it's pornography, whether it's news, you name it. Whether it's attention from guys. Like girls, I don't know how they deal with it with social media. So I think the conversation needs to happen with parents on a very frequent basis is to say, sweetheart, let's talk about what you're dealing with online. Sweetheart, what's going on in your mind? Help me understand what you're thinking about this issue. That's the role of a parent now. We can no longer give this responsibility to public school teachers or even college professors. I think it's the responsibility of families now. Because other things are incentivized very differently. I don't know if that helped, but that's kind of what I feel.
Speaking to the choir here, we're all old. We've got our kids raised.
But those that are, younger, like you're going to have, kids, and this is how we kind of have to think. And grandparents can play a role in this too, right? Because now kids have a device at the age of 3 or 4, right? Like mommy, daddy have to do work, meaning they have to text their friends so they keep their kids busy with the device. Yeah. Grandparents, you guys were raised without any of this stuff, so you can be completely present to your grandchildren. This is a major responsibility. So when you retire, there you go. So I think it comes again. This is my Afghan sensibility showing up, but it's a family responsibility. We no longer can outsource this task. I think this is our responsibility. I think that's what's missing a lot of the time. I hope that helps. What other questions? Gosh, this is fun. Anybody else?
Baktash,
Yes.
this isn't a question, but I think you'll find it interesting.
Okay.
I just mastered basmati rice. And you've mentioned it a few times, and it's delicious. I love it.
It's the best rice in the world.
Yeah,
And I
it
know
is.
where she lives.
Yeah.
It's the best rice in the world. What do we eat over here? Like Uncle Ben's? What is that? What is that?
He's not there anymore.
So before we close today, I just want to say, I know I said a lot up here, but I want you guys to kind of just, as we kind of think about who we are in the world, kind of how we navigate, the message that I kind of want to share with you and what I want you to kind of take from this is, you always have a choice to react in a way that you can be proud of. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Only you can judge yourself. And we will no longer be here one day. It's the nature of human existence. But if you can kind of go to rest with the idea of knowing that you can be proud of your actions, and your family can say, my grandfather, my father, my mother, they were a beautiful person. That's ultimately the biggest gift that you can give to the next generation. And so that's what I have to offer, because that's what I realized about my parents and how they've given that to me. So I just want to say thank you for your time, and thank you for having me.